For nearly 4 decades, the world has watched Christina Applegate and Ed O'Neill from a distance, as Kelly and Al Bundy, as on-screen father and daughter, as two people who built a strange kind of Hollywood family under studio lights. But in the past few years, something has shifted. Christina Applegate has started talking, really talking, about what that relationship actually meant to her. Not through tabloid headlines, not through rumor, but through her own words, on her own podcast, in her own voice. And what she's revealed paints a picture far more grounded and far more moving than any scripted sitcom ever could. When Married with Children premiered on Fox in 1987, Christina Applegate was just 15 years old. She was stepping onto the set of one of the most boundary-pushing sitcoms network television had ever produced, playing Kelly Bundy, a character built around teenage vanity and sharp one-liners. Ed O'Neill, already in his early 40s and seasoned by years in the industry, played her father, Al Bundy. What started as a professional pairing between a veteran actor and a teenage newcomer would stretch across 11 seasons and, eventually, across decades of real life. Applegate has spent years hinting at how important O'Neill became to her during that time. But it wasn't until her podcast, Messy, which she co-hosts with actress Jamelyn Sigler, that she laid it out in full. In 2024, O'Neill joined her as a guest, and the conversation between them became one of the most talked-about moments in either of their recent careers. Applegate introduced him by saying she barely knew how to describe him, before telling him plainly that he had raised her, and that whatever people liked or didn't like about her, it was because of him. It wasn't just a throwaway compliment. Applegate went further, describing how O'Neill had been present through some of the hardest chapters of her life, including her mother's cancer diagnosis, which happened while she was still a teenager working on the show. She talked about building emotional armor to get through those years, and about how O'Neill was someone who stayed close through all of it. This wasn't a nostalgic soundbite manufactured for an interview. This was a woman in her 50s, looking back at the person who helped her survive her own adolescence in an industry that isn't always kind to child performers. What makes their bond stand out is how ordinary it has remained, even decades later. On that same podcast episode, Applegate described their current relationship in strikingly simple terms. She told O'Neill that even though she generally hates talking on the phone, she'll happily spend hours on calls with him, laughing and covering everything under the sun. She said he was the person she talked to more than almost anyone else. Not a Hollywood friendship maintained for appearances. A real one, sustained the old-fashioned way, through phone calls that have nothing to do with cameras or press tours. Their history together wasn't without its share of turbulence, and some of it had nothing to do with their relationship at all. It had to do with the show itself. In 1989, a Michigan homemaker named Terry Ricolta watched an episode of Married with Children and was so offended by its content that she launched a public campaign against it, writing to advertisers and appearing on television to argue the show should be pulled off the air. Several major sponsors, including some large national brands, pulled their advertising in response. For a while, it looked like the controversy might genuinely threaten the show's future. Instead, the backlash had the opposite effect. The attention drew curious new viewers who wanted to see what the fuss was about, and ratings climbed. The show not only survived the controversy, it emerged from it more popular than before, and the cast came out of the experience bonded by having weathered a genuine public firestorm together as a team. For a show built on chaos and dysfunction on screen, the real dysfunction they faced from the outside world seemed to bring the cast closer rather than pulling them apart. Perhaps the most surprising thing Applegate and O'Neill have revealed together isn't about their friendship at all. It's about how carelessly the show ended. Married with Children was canceled in 1997 after 11 seasons, but there was no proper send-off, no farewell episode, no formal acknowledgement from the network. Applegate has said she found out the show was over secondhand, through someone connected to her assistant at the time, rather than through any direct communication from Fox. Neither she nor O'Neill received meaningful residuals from the show's success in the years that followed, a fact both of them had discussed candidly on her podcast. O'Neill, reflecting on the lack of closure, even referenced how other long-running sitcoms had sent their casts off with grand gestures, while Married with Children's ending felt like it barely registered with the network at all. That lack of closure lingered for both of them, even as their careers moved in different directions. Applegate went on to build a career that spanned film and television, including roles in Anchorman, Samantha Who, and eventually the Netflix dark comedy Dead to Me, which earned her multiple Emmy nominations. O'Neill, meanwhile, found a second wave of fame playing Jay Pritchard on Modern Family, a role that introduced him to an entirely new generation of viewers and cemented his place as one of television's most beloved sitcom dads, on screen and, in some ways, off it too. Then, in August 2021, everything changed. Applegate announced publicly that she had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a chronic condition affecting the central nervous system that had been discovered months earlier while she was filming the final season of Dead to Me. MS has no cure. It can affect mobility, balance, and cognitive function, and its progression varies from person to person. For Applegate, the diagnosis meant relearning how to move through the world, adjusting to using a cane, and confronting a level of physical uncertainty she had never faced before. She has been remarkably candid about what that adjustment actually felt like. In an interview with Vanity Fair, she described the disease bluntly, saying it simply never gives you a good day, only smaller, harder ones. She's spoken about the toll it took on her sense of self, admitting she wasn't sure she could imagine returning to a film or television set given how physically demanding that kind of work is. For an actress who had spent almost her entire life in front of cameras, the diagnosis raised real questions about whether her career, as she'd known it, was truly over. Despite that uncertainty, Applegate chose not to disappear from public life. In November 2022, she made her first public appearance since her diagnosis when she received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. She arrived using a cane, supported at points by her former Married with Children co-star Katie Sagal, and was joined by other former castmates including David Faustino, along with her Dead to Me co-star Linda Cardellini. During her speech, she used her trademark humor to address her illness head-on, joking with the crowd about her condition rather than avoiding the subject, all while her young daughter watched from the audience, a moment Applegate later described as one of the most important of the day. A little over a year later, in January 2024, Applegate made an even more visible appearance at the 75th Emmy Awards, an event that had been delayed from its original September 2023 date. She walked onto the stage using her cane, arm in arm with host Anthony Anderson, as the Married with Children theme song played over her entrance. The entire audience rose to its feet in a spontaneous standing ovation, one that visibly overwhelmed her. True to form, she diffused the emotional weight of the moment with a joke, telling the crowd they were shaming her by standing, a line that had the room laughing through what had just been genuine tears moments before. Throughout this period, Applegate leaned on humor as a survival tool almost as much as she leaned on the people around her. She showed up to the 2023 SAG Awards with a cane bearing the message FUMS, turning what could have been a symbol of vulnerability into one of defiance. She's spoken openly about coping through what she calls her humor shield, using comedy not to hide from her diagnosis but to face it without letting it define every conversation about her. Through all of this, her bond with Ed O'Neill never faded into the background of old sitcom trivia. If anything, it became more visible than ever, precisely because Applegate chose to talk about it during one of the hardest periods of her life. The messy podcast conversation with O'Neill wasn't framed as a dramatic reunion built for headlines. It was two people who had known each other since she was a teenager, sitting down and reflecting honestly on everything that had passed between them, including the parts that had nothing to do with show business at all. What emerges from all of this isn't a story of scandal, nor is it the kind of sensational secret history that tabloid headlines often promise. It's something quieter and, in some ways, more remarkable. It's the story of a professional relationship that began under unusual circumstances, a teenage actress and a veteran performer thrown together on a controversial, boundary-pushing sitcom, and somehow turned into a genuine, lasting friendship that outlived the show, outlived Hollywood's usual short attention span, and has now outlived even the health crisis that threatened to end Applegate's public life altogether. There has been no official Married with Children reunion special, no scripted revival bringing the Bundy family back together on a soundstage. Given the physical demands of a traditional production, And Applegate's own honesty about the uncertainty MS has introduced into her ability to work on set. That kind of reunion may not be realistic in the way fans have long imagined it. But something else has happened instead. An unscripted, honest, adult version of that reunion. One that played out not on a Fox soundstage, but on a podcast microphone, between two people simply talking about what they mean to each other now that the cameras from Married with Children have been off for more than a quarter of a century. Applegate has built her podcast, in part, as a way to keep working and connecting with audiences on her own terms, without the physical demands that a traditional acting job would require. It doesn't require long hours standing on set or memorizing scripts. It lets her show up as herself, cane and all, and have the kind of unguarded conversations that a scripted sitcom reunion could never really deliver anyway. In some ways, that conversation with O'Neill gave fans something more honest than a nostalgic revival ever could. A real look at two people who built something lasting out of a show that was never supposed to be about family in the first place, and ended up meaning exactly that. What Christina Applegate has revealed about her relationship with Ed O'Neill isn't a scandal waiting to be uncovered. It's a portrait of steadiness across decades, through a show that almost got cancelled by a boycott, through an ending that came without warning or ceremony, through separate career paths, and now through a diagnosis that changed the entire shape of her daily life. Through every version of that story, one thing has remained constant. A friendship that started on a Fox soundstage in 1987 and is still, by both of their own accounts, very much alive today.